I'm excited to be here today discussing navigating the accessibility iceberg, approaches for organizational accessibility excellence. I'm Kelsey. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a white woman with curly auburn hair and freckles wearing glasses. Our discussion today is rather broad. There's no one-size-fits-all approach for accessibility. So much about success in this space has a lot to do with an organization's culture, resiliency, and let's be honest, ego. And that brings us to our topics today, which are focused on approaches to avoid accessibility fatigue, assess knowledge, culture, and resilience, understand the landscape, identify opportunities for action, build sustaining systems, and taking care of ourselves and our community. I'm willing to bet that many of you attending AXCON are in very different stages of your organization-wide accessibility maturity. And sometimes progress isn't linear. It can look like 2 steps forward and then 5 steps backward. And I also want to let you know that there's a lot of information in today's discussion crammed into a short period of time. I do have a lot to share, and I'm a tactical person by nature, and I wish I could share even more with the time we have. But I do want to say that this is not a space for shaming, it's not a space for comparison, and it's not a space for competition. I encourage you, as we progress through the discussion, to take what you need and revisit the rest if and when you need it. So before we dive in, let's talk about the iceberg. In my own experience, leveraging the iceberg imagery has been very, very helpful as a tactic in educating others about the multifaceted nature of organization-wide accessibility efforts. Icebergs show their peak above the water. Often that peak is pretty massive, but it's not until you look below the surface of the water when you realize the peak is an incredibly small part of the actual entirety of the iceberg. The majority is unseen, deep beneath the surface. The work we do in accessibility is often misunderstood as just the peak. For example, many organizations of all sectors and all sizes come to accessibility because of litigation or complaints about their physical or digital spaces. The response to this is often, oh, we have to fix that thing. And then the cycle of problem, fix, begins. This approach can get in the way of identifying what the root of the problem or problems may actually be. The root often lies below the surface and is a culmination of all of the systems at play, which brought accessibility to focus anyway. The iceberg as a framework provides a guide to understand the nuanced nature of accessibility work. The framework is broken into 5 key areas with guiding questions for your consideration. The first is events. This again is the peak of the iceberg, outside the water. To understand events, ask yourself, what is observed and what is occurring? The stuff below the surface ultimately comes together to answer the why this event is occurring question, which is usually why when I start accessibility programs, I begin at the bottom of the framework. The second one, just below the surface of the water, is patterns. To understand patterns, ask yourself, what reoccurring events do we observe over time? Patterns are important because they often provide you insight into the why behind the current established practices, such as how an organization builds software or hardware or executes on its services. Current patterns or lack of patterns are important to keep in mind when you're about to embark on accessibility change management. Number 3, slightly deeper in the water, you come across trends. To understand trends, ask yourself, what are the common forces at play? Sometimes forces are people or stakeholders, consumers, technology, innovation, and ultimately trends ebb and flow. So they're important to understand because it helps you identify opportunities and risks. Getting deeper, we find structures. To understand structures, ask yourself, what influences the patterns and trends? This can be a tricky one to answer sometimes, but you'll find a lot of influence in an organization's leadership, policies, processes, and procedures. Finally, in the deepest depths, you'll find the bottom of the iceberg, or mental models. To understand mental models, ask yourself, what values, assumptions, and beliefs shape this system? Mental models about disability and accessibility have the greatest impact on accessibility success at an organization. These mental models shape perception of accessibility work. And at its heart, accessibility is a massive effort in resiliency and change management. So, when someone asks you the age-old question, when will our company be accessible? The answer is never so simple. Everything beneath the surface is a contributing factor to the larger system at play. And the question itself might actually be part of the problem. So let's start at the peak, addressing events. The obvious situations occurring that bring accessibility to the forefront. The way this often plays out in product development is in a more reactive downstream approach. This means you find a lot of organizations constantly chasing accessibility tech debt, thinking this is the reality of accessibility in product. This is absolutely not the way to approach accessibility if you hope to make continuous and iterative progress and build a long-standing, mature, and accessibility-forward organization. Focusing solely on the peak of the iceberg without addressing what's below the surface will lead to fatigue and burnout, immediately getting accessibility a bad rap. So let's use an upstream versus downstream analogy. This will help us consider the difference between proactive and reactive accessibility. Imagine you and your friend are meeting to enjoy a lovely picnic on a grassy area beside a beautiful flowing river. It's a gorgeous day, and you're just about to dig in when suddenly you see a person yelling for help floating down the river. They can't seem to fight the current, and they're in trouble. Your friend immediately jumps in and tries to help. And as your friend is bringing this person to safety on the riverbank, you notice two more people coming down the river in need of help again. You both jump in to bring them to safety this time, but each time you get back to land, both of you are jumping right back in to save more and more people. You're exhausted with these unexpected, repeated rescue efforts. And suddenly, your friend gets out of the water and starts walking away. You call out to ask, "Where are you headed?" Because you still need help saving all of these people coming down the river. Your friend calls back that you both can't keep saving people because it's unsustainable. And they're heading upstream to figure out why all of these people are drowning in the first place. So hopefully the problem stops. I think this analogy is a lot like what accessibility professionals often experience at organizations when you're building a team and kicking off accessibility efforts. Many organizations only recognize reactive accessibility or bug fixes, for example, but don't understand what proactive accessibility looks like, which ultimately reduces accessibility issues or barriers downstream. And in general, reduces that accessibility fatigue that many engineering teams often feel when accessibility isn't proactively baked into the whole product lifecycle. We absolutely cannot continue to let teams believe that accessibility equates to repeated bug fixes, or we are all in trouble. So, accessibility professionals know a reactive approach is not sustainable. And despite being someone who has built several accessibility programs at different types of organizations, I definitely do not know it all. But I do not know that there is an important tipping point when you enter an organization, and it's critical to address fatigue as quickly as possible and right that ship before those mental models shift so far to the negative regarding accessibility that culture and perception about this work take a massive hit. So, speaking of mental models, let's take the plunge, pun intended, and start in the deepest depths and work our way up. I always start with mental models in preparation for a massive accessibility undertaking. We know humans can be both absolutely wonderful and absolutely difficult, and we create our own realities based on our current values, assumptions, and beliefs. Our personal and professional realities reflect these beliefs in our practice. So one of the first things I do when joining a new organization is take a pulse check on the culture. Some ways I do this are completing interviews. Interviews and interviewing various roles at different levels and key teams, like your marketing or branding or legal, engineering, sales, any of those teams and more. Some of these departments are critical to your organization's future accessibility maturity, and you'll want to have these contacts for later, I promise. For those I'd like to interview but can't seem to get a hold of, I listen. I listen to their speeches in town halls. I observe their comments and seek to understand their leadership style and what they say about the organization as a whole. Do they lead with empathy, core values, fear, apathy? How might they be helping or harming the culture? How does their approach set the tone for the organization as a whole? I also seek out possible alliances. Discussions with privacy, security, and data teams help to understand their approach. Was their work easily embraced? Are they still struggling to get buy-in? What worked for them in getting buy-in? What didn't work? Often these teams experience very similar beginnings as accessibility. So if they do exist at your organization, it's important to understand how they sustain. I review policies and procedures. What types of policies and procedures do exist? What is the tone of each of those policies? Anything about disability or accessibility? What's missing? You can learn a lot about the type of policies available and how they are enforced. I also consider the culture around knowledge and learning too. Are people given time and space to learn, or are they told just to go do this on their own in their own time? Are there established programs to support continued education? And finally, I forecast for the future. Ultimately, I want to know if an organization is flexible and resilient. How long have they been around? Are you confident in their future? Thinking back to leadership, what type of leadership does the top lead with? And does that seem aligned with competing factors both internally and externally? These steps help me get an understanding of the mental models ingrained in an organization. What you learn during this investigation will help you understand some of the challenges you will inevitably experience in building this program. It will also give you a sense of what helps programs succeed and help you identify important allies and opportunities for collaboration and innovation. I found the result from assessing culture is a deep need for community. Establishing accessibility communities will create opportunities for influence, and there are numerous ways to build communities. For one, you can create communities of practice. Most accessibility teams just aren't large enough to handhold every single department across an organization-wide accessibility journey. Right away, you have to start upskilling and scaling your efforts. One way to do this is establish key communication channels. For example, you might leverage your organization's chat communication system, whether it's Slack, Microsoft Teams, WebEx Teams, Google Chat, whatever. Build a chat space where you can provide key announcements about accessibility efforts, policies, training, and more. Our team also breaks down those larger announcement spaces into smaller role-based or department-specific spaces, and that helps to organize the team for our shared responsibility. So we have channels for design, engineering, marketing, product, and more. These communities of practice also provide a great space for central accessibility teams to manage questions and conversations without having a million one-off conversations with people throughout the organization, which is often just not feasible. Others will begin to learn in these channels too. And as people start learning, they'll be empowered to step in and provide support and guidance to their peers. Establish consistent office hours. Role-based office hours at different times throughout the work week to account for varied time zones is a great way to manage face time for more complex questions or conversations that can't easily be handled via a chat. This is a space for showcasing designs or code and problem-solving solutions together in real time. Record these. Find a place to keep them and map the key topics against them so you can pull clips or content from them later for educational purposes. It can be helpful when establishing governance and accessibility points of view as well. I should mention, it's also a really good idea to make sure you have a concrete way for people to sign up for office hours with their topics in advance. It can be a lot to manage at first, so devise a plan leverage knowledgeable supporters from your communities of practice, and find a way that's sustainable for you and your team. Develop learning opportunities. Formal and informal opportunities for learning are critical to scaling an accessibility program with success. Many organizations have champions programs that aim to upskill people across departments and roles, which better help to scale accessibility support. I'm personally a fan of focusing training efforts and programs on active learning instead of passive learning. I have a background in education and instructional design, and I know that active learning is what makes it all stick. If someone can Google it, let them. Focus on the learning that requires applied knowledge. You want people to mess up and learn. If you work in an organization that builds digital products, you might be leveraging a waterfall, agile, or even wagile approach. Learn how these teams operate and target learning that reflects them and makes sense to them. If your team is working in a triad, cater the learning to be role-specific or individual and role collaborative or interdisciplinary. And finally, celebrate wins. To build community, it's important to build confidence and validation through recognition. Accessibility recognition programs can happen in so many different ways. You might have an Ally Award that is awarded monthly, quarterly, or annually to celebrate significant achievements in accessibility. You might even invite those who achieve excellence in a project focused on accessibility to present about that internally or externally. And you might even have them write an article about the achievement. Recognition and celebration helps positive reinforcement efforts and showcases pride felt about accessibility forward initiatives. And this helps build your comrades throughout your whole community. So, moving upward on the deepest part of the iceberg are structures. Essentially, what policies, procedures, and organization exist. Where do people get information and learn about expectations? And more importantly, who are these people? How are teams structured? How do they work together and what are they responsible for? Because accessibility initiatives span departments and teams, because accessibility, sorry y'all, we're coming back. Here we go. Because accessibility initiatives span departments and teams, we have a unique opportunity to find a lot of cracks in the system, which also position us well to bring light to those cracks and help find ways to repair them, which also ensures accessibility gets integrated into the repair. So the key here is to identify the structures in place and determine how to integrate into the current structures that work well, how to optimize structures that don't work well, and how to build structures where there are none. No matter what your role is at the organization, it's both hard and precarious to build a house on a shaky foundation. So lay the concrete first, and then build out and up. Once you've got a handle on the landscape, now you can start building. I always start with clear, established roles and responsibilities. I ask myself, who contributes to accessibility here, and what do they need to know and do to be successful? More importantly, how do they know these things? Depending on your organization, there's a few opportunities to consider. Obtain a comprehensive list of products and teams. You have to understand what is going on and how the organization is structured. Who does what, when, where, and honestly, sometimes why. Get it documented. It's amazing how this is rarely available in a central location at many organizations. If you don't know the landscape, when you're asked that infamous question, when will our company be accessible? Your answer will always be, I have no idea. And if you find yourself unable to get a straight answer about the landscape, including those team structures and products or services, I recommend you chat with your often understated ally in finance. Everything at organizations of all sectors and sizes have a money line to somewhere. So finance is often most in the know about what's going on. From my team to yours, you're welcome for that tidbit. Document what you learn, because you can use this as a foundation for measurement and tracking efforts as you move along. Ensure key stakeholders know who you are and what you do. Identify these people right away. You'll often learn more about all of these key stakeholders during those initial interviews you have. And you can even find out about who might be really sticky to work with and who will be your greatest supporter. Stay close to both. Meet with them regularly, discuss progress, areas of opportunity, and build your relationship. This will be important as your program seeks to grow and mature. Communicate and document the product approach and tooling. For organizations working on products, understanding and documenting the product approach and tooling ensures you know how accessibility must embed. If you work in a large, multifaceted organization, you might find a million different ways teams work. I've worked in organizations where some teams don't even use the same products for their operations. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Accessibility teams are uniquely positioned to identify cracks and highlight opportunities to streamline. We can use this to our advantage. We already know mature accessibility practices save companies money and time, but our expertise and unique positioning helps us save money and time organization-wide. And document all accessibility processes and expectations. Our team goal is to document as though you may win the lottery. If you do, you might not be back tomorrow, and whoever takes your place should have enough documentation to step in and be up and running in no time. Make sure your team has an internal accessibility site of some kind, a place where people can go. If you're a Microsoft organization, maybe that's a SharePoint. You can connect your SharePoint to so many things. We embed forms, lists with status items, educational videos, and more. Having a standard and strategic way to capture support requests or inquiries, like through a form, helps to understand your team capacity and the kind of support most request. Having this data can help when you need to ask for more support or more resources. Leverage automation to do a lot of these administrative, time-consuming documentation tasks. I cannot stress the importance of leveraging this for as many logistical things as you can. It helps you focus your energy on the big, important work. Our team uses a lot of complex automation for tracking requests, tooling, license access, task organization, and more. Another critical aspect for documentation, especially when you have a smaller team, is limiting the number of times you have to answer the same repeated questions. You may consider specific areas of your internal website to focus on these repeated asks, like FAQs, frequently asked questions, such as what browser screen reader combinations do we support, or what level of the web content accessibility guidelines do we strive to meet. For more specific role-based questions, you can consider starting a blog or micro-learning moments. So it allows you to just grab a link and send it to people who ask these questions. And that way they can attempt to self-service. And if they still don't get it or still need support, have them come to your office hours. So let's talk a little bit about action. At this point, we've discussed taking a pulse on the organization's mental models, getting a handle on the structure that exists, for better or for worse, and documenting the landscape in preparation for getting up and running. Now it's time to really dig in and identify opportunities for action by understanding the trends or common forces at the organization. You've started to understand these trends by interviewing different roles at different levels and tenure, and you have a sense for what policies and procedures are setting the tone and the structure. As you've documented the landscape, you might start noticing some of these key trends, what works and what doesn't work. Accessibility often starts as a trend. If that's what gets us in the door, fine, but let's be a trend that works, meaning what might start as a trend needs to transition to sustaining as a critical facet of the organization's operations. Ultimately, I see most accessibility teams as enablement teams. We're not here to do the work for you. If we do that, we gatekeep the knowledge and skill, and it will be impossible to transition from trending to sustaining. Instead, we're here to empower and enable teams to learn, practice, execute independently with increasing levels of skill over time. This is how we start to shift from reactive to proactive. And this is how we share the knowledge and start to build more inclusive spaces. And in this enablement function, we can start to scale. So we're moving from trending to sustaining by getting action-oriented. How we identify these opportunities for action, let's chat about. Develop your strategic plan and build your program's yearly roadmaps from that plan. A 5+ year plan shows the opportunity that lies ahead and provides key initiatives to get you going on a yearly basis. Document this and talk about it often. Pull in elements from what you've learned during your investigation. What stakeholders can you count on? And what initiatives do they have that accessibility can embed into? The more you connect to your program to initiatives that are already up and running, the better. This is an important one. Intentionally build your team. If you have a 5+ year plan and a layout of the key focal points and initiatives, it means that you have a sense for the roles you need to empower and enable teams. For example, at a large organization that builds digital products, the documentation you have on the landscape can help you tune into which roles must be reflected on your team. If you're functioning as an enablement team, you should reflect the organization's landscape. So if you have an agile approach, you might very well need to have the agile triad reflected as key roles in your team. So product, design, and engineering. I often present about the criticality of intentional team growth as well. If you grow too quickly without clear expectations and outcomes identified, you become a target. You also, as a leader, may struggle to lay the foundation for your program to ensure those on your team are both able to execute on their work, but also be supported from the people management standpoint. When you grow intentionally, you'll find yourself with an incredible, empathetic, high-performing team ready to teach, support, and enable others to be empowered to do this work. Ensure documentation repositories are available. As you start to ask stakeholders and teams to execute on work, they need to know where to share that information. Pre-establish those channels. Create those spaces where they can share and collaborate. At large organizations that have dozens or even hundreds of products, you might find establishing accessibility councils or accessibility committees helpful. These councils or committees become a dotted line to your central team. Having documentation repositories for these councils or committees ensures products or department-specific work is documented and tracked. If your organization uses something like Jira, make sure that you document how accessibility fits into that equation. Make use of Jira labels and train teams on how to document appropriately. You can leverage so many amazing queries to capture cross-functional organizational status this way. And provide teams with concrete step-by-step plans. You have to have detailed plans to successfully enable teams. As one example, if you're starting or seeking to start a large number or even a small number of product teams on an accessibility journey, create a step-by-step, and I mean step-by-step guide about what that means and take that guide on the road to show the various teams how to get started. In this guide, make it clear about what they need to do, how they need to do it, and what deliverables are due for each step by when. If you have those product-specific documentation repositories, you already have the location and process for communicating these deliverables and providing status updates. Remember when I mentioned the importance of documenting the landscape? This is when that becomes important. If you have a comprehensive document outlining all of your products and all of the key contacts, you can then integrate that with the steps you need them to take, or the steps in this step-by-step guide. This way, you're able to track progress across teams against those steps. And this also helps with answering those questions I keep mentioning, like, when will we be accessible? When will this company be accessible? Having these plans and a way to holistically track progress to the plan helps communicate your process. It also helps those who don't yet understand the nuance of accessibility to ask better questions about progress, like, do our teams have an understanding of their baselines? Or how should we best prioritize accessibility issues into our sprints? When I say it's a journey, I really mean it. It really is. I can't stress the importance of step-by-step guides for organizations and for new teams. We can't expect people to just know what we know. This is so new to many. When I was working in education, I used to follow a modeling approach, making me laugh, which I officially dubbed the I do, we do, you do method. So modeling essentially is repetitive and it requires a layer of handholding. And eventually we want to be able to relinquish that handholding and concrete support. But if we remove it too soon, it crumbles. So when you're in that I do portion of modeling, you're really walking them through your mental process out loud. That's essentially what a step-by-step guide does. It acts as a cognitive walkthrough for teams to hold on to and revisit as needed. And it also keeps you sane by cutting down on the repetition. You constantly have to think about scaling, scaling, scaling. And of course, as you scale, you must be prepared to create a program that sustains. This takes me to one of my favorite aspects in this whole conversation today, building sustaining systems. We've reached the portion of the iceberg just below the surface, where patterns exist, or what reoccurring events do we observe over time. The over time part is key here because we want to observe sustained operational systematic accessibility. We want teams to achieve independence, allowing us to remain consultative and focused on continued enablement and innovation. This is the key distinction between trends and patterns. Trends ebb and flow, and patterns sustain. As humans, we continuously build systems that propel societies forward, but we also build many systems that crumble to the ground. When systems succeed, we learn. When systems fail, we arguably learn more. And with each step in any direction, we experience something new and gain knowledge that helps us to iterate and innovate. When we know better, we hopefully do better. And as I continue to read about numerous examples of systems, I always think about the product development lifecycle, because it's a system that is multifaceted, interdependent, and interconnected. And to build user-focused products that meet diverse needs, we follow processes that make the product system work. I know it can be challenging to look at a system and break it down into its various functions, especially when it's very complex. But we want to ensure accessibility integrates into current systems and does not stand alone, isolated as its own separate system. In undertaking a journey like this, a key question comes to mind. Can disability inclusion act as a meaningful purpose driver for enacting sustaining change in a product system? If our purpose is to build inclusive and useful products for anyone who interacts with them, then our systems must adapt. Speaking about purpose and systems, one of my favorite quotes that I reference often when working with teams is to remember the purpose behind the work they do. The late Donella Meadows, an author of numerous books, including Thinking in Systems, wrote, "A change in purpose changes a system profoundly, even if every element and interconnection remain the same. Lean into purpose. Profound, positive, and impactful change will follow." Sometimes our teams need purpose. It's easy to become a cog in the wheel or a drone in the system, but accessibility can reignite the purpose of this work for many and remind people that we can make or break someone's experience. Above all else, take care. I recently, last week, wrote an article on LinkedIn called "The Courage to be Disliked," which is an homage to a book by the same name and a nod to the reality of our profession today. I'll share some sentiments from that right now. For everyone working with accessibility professionals and teams out there and joining us today at AXCON, I encourage you to remember your local accessibility professional or inclusion champion is on your side. We are knocking on your door, not as monsters, but as supporters. And we want you to be successful. And we want disabled people everywhere to have the best experiences in every environment. Accessibility professionals are here to do our jobs. And sometimes that means you might not like it, or even us. And sometimes we must be more direct because we're here to help you succeed. And we may be really tired because it can be exhausting to both fight for the right thing and know this work exists because the disability community suffers when accessibility isn't taken seriously. Ultimately, having done this work for a long time, I know not everyone will approach it with the same love and care, intention, integrity, and urgency as it deserves. And I know people will get frustrated with accessibility professionals bringing to light issues or introducing new processes or procedures. And I know that we must bear the weight of the courage to be disliked. With that, though, comes a heavy cognitive and emotional toll, particularly because many of us doing this work are also a part of the disability community ourselves. And that can be a lot. And we must take care of ourselves and of each other. And you need to also take care of your teams. Find time for joy and play in all of the madness. My team loves to engage in activities that ensure we're having fun. And you can find some of those things like when we all dressed up as different web content accessibility guidelines for Halloween. You can find it on my LinkedIn. It's great. But prioritize connection, avoid toxic positivity, and lean into tragic optimism. We have to keep our strengths. We're a lot more similar than we are different. So now what? My main advice from all of this today is take what you need and leave the rest. You can always come back to gain more tidbits of information as you chart your path forward and continue the journey. This work isn't quick. And that's because often we're in situations as accessibility professionals where we are both teaching teams to drive the bus and build the bus at the same time. That's hard. Patience and empathy are virtues here. The key facets I've outlined today about building sustaining accessibility programs, in summary, include 1, avoiding accessibility fatigue. Get teams proactive. 2, assessing knowledge, culture, and resilience. Get the information you need to know what you're working with. 3, understand the landscape. Get structure in place and improve upon the structure that already exists. 4, identify opportunities for action. Get moving on strategy, program measurement, and execution. 5, build sustaining systems. Get strategically embedded and keep your sights on innovation. And 6, take care of yourself and our community. Get support for you and others in the form of self and community care because this field takes thick skin. And when you're feeling lost or destabilized, finding it hard to identify your next steps, consider the iceberg. Use it as a model to structure your program and identify the best place to start below the surface. Don't just live in the theoretical, drive to the applied. And when things are totally whack, don't focus on what you can't do. Just ask yourself, what can I do with what I have right now? So thank you so much for spending some time with me today. You can always connect with me on LinkedIn. I don't often check my messages there, but if you're seeking a conversation, not a solicitation, you're welcome to fill out my request to consult Google form, which is in one of my featured posts. All right, Tilly, let's open it up for some questions and conversation.
Kelsey, thank you. So awesome. We have lots of questions.
Oh, all right.
And we probably don't have all the time in the world for those questions, but to your point, everyone that has asked questions, I think Kelsey just invited you to ask her those questions directly through her profile. So we'll get through some of these, and I will be sure to share these questions with her as well. Really? She's very committed to this community. So let's start with the first one. Such a great way to explain this. So how do you get people to jump into accessibility work with you? I'm especially curious about how you bring people along that don't share the same purpose or whose emotional intelligence is just not in the same place.
That's tricky. Oh my goodness. I would actually say though, don't start with them. Like it's going to be a long road with some of those people. if you're just starting out, or even if you're in a place where you feel like you've hit a wall, find the people who want to do the work first, because those are the people that will help you build your influence. If there's a mountain of people who are running toward this work, it's hard not to trample those who are lagging. So we don't want them to be trampled. We want them to start running too, but usually they don't tend to be the place to put your energy, because there's many more people out there that you can find that are ready to run.
Awesome. Second question. How do you build your team and confidence in your team when it's entirely remote? Lots of
Ooh,
people wondering about that.
okay. I have mostly worked with remote teams in this work, so it feels a bit more natural for me. And I have a lot of confidence in my team because I hire really, really strong people. I'm so proud of the teams that I've had the pleasure of working with. No human is perfect, whether you're in person or remote all the time. So I think checking in and really understanding the nature of the different people you work with and finding out what's the support they need to be successful. When you get there, it's not so much a confidence thing. It's like all right, how do we do this together?
Excellent. This next question, I love this one because it goes with accessibility needs to be part of everything.
Hmm.
What are your tips towards building a community of practice when no roles are solely accessibility related, but everyone has their regular roles, UX devs, QAs, and accessibility is more of an add-on?
Well, I guess I'd start with the latter part of that. If people are working in those roles, I think the first thing I'd start with is helping them understand why accessibility isn't an add-on, and why, if they don't have accessibility ingrained in the work that they do, they're not billing, or they're not they're not billing, probably they're not creating full products. Like, their products are not complete. So I think that's the first thing, is why do they think it's an add-on? Because we got to work on that. That's a mental model thing. And then I think we can start shifting more to, okay, what do they do with that? And usually I find people don't consider it a part of their role because they don't understand it. So we have a lot of work to do to kind of build up that knowledge base, and help them understand that this is no different than the need to build products with security and privacy. It's an incomplete product otherwise.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah.
One more. How do you share, this is a long one. How do you share accessibility initiatives between people from your community of practice, your accessibility guild in friends, team dedicating regular time and growing accessibility in your company, right? And you as a leader? Are they initiatives you are not involved in? Are there initiatives that are a lead? You do any on your own?
I don't know if I fully understand the question. Like, how do we make
How do
the
you share?
the responsibility, or kind of like track the progress across all?
I would say the way that I read it is it's activity, it's progress, it's keeping
Oh my
supporting each
gosh.
other, helping each other.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the communities of practice. We build those very strategically, as in, when we meet someone, we add them immediately to our main channel. We add them to the general channel, and we add them to the channel that's specific to their role or department. That gets them ingrained in kind of the things we have to talk about, how we approach things. And the beauty of our general channel that we have is that all people that we add to different spaces are there. So it's a great place to kind of push out information about what we're doing, what others are doing, and it kind of holistically comes together in that way. Also, we have a SharePoint site, and a lot of organizations do this, where they build a place internally that everyone can kind of drive to for self-servicing. And we have a news and events area for that, where we often highlight things we're thinking about, hot topics, places where people can learn more. And then the last thing I'll say is, part of that recognition program I was talking about, whatever it might look like for you. One thing that we also do is like a takeover monthly. So we find people, or people are nominated, who are doing incredible things, that may be related to the work that our team is driving or not. Usually we have a pulse on all the different things, but we also recognize we can't drive everything or handhold everything. So we find those folks and we say, tell us about what you're doing, and come do a takeover in our general space. and tell everyone about it. So we really like to share cross-functional information regularly. I hope that hits the
It
question.
does. I reread the question one more time as
Yeah.
you were answering.
Yeah.
There's a question within there that is
Okay.
about you in your role as a leader and how involved you are in everything that your team is doing, because you can't be in all places at the same time, that sort of thing. So it's a bit about that, I think, is what this person was wanting to understand more about.
So I have two thoughts on that. One is that I have an incredible amount of trust in my team. And I think that's a really key factor here, because my question back to you would be, why do you feel like you need to be involved in all of those things? Is it because you're concerned about some of like the knowledge or skill sets or whatever? And I would kind of work through some of that and figure that out. Our team also has a pretty, shout out to those on my team who developed this, but a pretty significant Kanban board that drives a lot of the work that's going on. And we just implemented something called 411-911, which is super helpful for me because I can't be aware of everything that's going on intricately. I have a good sense of broad, like sweeping things. But if my team needs me, they tag 411, like, you need to know about this, or 911, you need to do something about this. So that's helping me tremendously.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question here is, how can companies be inclusive of mental disabilities? Someone with a bad childhood, for example, could behave differently than people who grow up normally. How do organizations approach that?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. There's a lot to kind of unpack there. I mean, I think that comes back to a lot of like really the mental models that we were talking about. And I feel like the heart of this question is, how do you know that you've entered a safe space? And I'm not sure we can always know that. And I think organizations are so complex that you might find there are safe spaces within the broader organization and less safe spaces. Or you might find that an organization as a whole is a really comfortable and safe place to be. I think you need to spend time assessing that culture, that understanding of like, how do people receive me here? How do I receive people here? Because in some ways, there's choice in the matter. And in other ways, it can be really hard. And I don't think I have a full answer for it because people are so complex. And I think it's also like finding out, your manager, what are they like? How are they helpful or not helpful? Are they able to step in and support you with what you need, what your strengths are, where some things might be more challenging or triggering? I think it's an effort in continuous iteration, though. But that's a really interesting question.
It is.
Yeah.
Kelsey, thank you.
Yeah.
You did such a wonderful job. You are so kind to share it with all of us. There are several other questions. I'll share them with you offline.
Awesome.
For everyone that participated here, make sure you keep the conversation going on our community Discord. Kelsey is there as well.
Yeah.